My name is Heather Mann, and I am joined today by some amazing women, and together we're going to explore the theme of right climate change speech. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves when the time comes, but I'll just give you a little bit of a game plan for the evening. I thought we could start with an exercise on beginning anew with Mother Earth. And then I'm going to ask Lisa to go first. And Lisa's going to share a little bit about the right speech and right view interbeing. Right speech and right view. And also perhaps offer us a little bit of neuroscience and maybe some song. And then my sister Joyce will follow her, and she's going to have a different style of sharing, like we all do, because she's someone who lives very close to the land. And there's an intimacy and a quiet way there that I think really represents so much of the variation that we have in terms of circumstances and people and moments when we're trying to communicate. So I'm really looking forward to what our sister Joyce has to say. And then I'm going to say a few words about my evolution on this topic. And I'm particularly interested in that interbeing between right speech and right action. Lisa?
Good evening. My name is Lisa Hecht. My name is Lisa Hecht, thank you. I currently live in Idaho, and I'm bringing together tonight a background in engineering and environmentalism and music and general nerdism, and just a real passion for what hopefully we all share, which is how to take care of Mother Earth, particularly with respect to climate change. And I'll start with a story. In 1975, way back when the Earth was still cooling, I began my engineering studies at the University of Wisconsin. And I remember hearing about this thing called global warming. And it made sense to me from everything that I knew about physics, chemistry. And I told my family about this, and they were like, you're crazy, you know. They just would not buy it. And then as the years went by, I saw the ozone issue come up, and I saw humanity jump on that and solve that, and I thought, well, if we can solve that, we can solve climate change. And the years went by, and we kind of almost got there, and there was this fervor in the 70s and in the 80s. And perhaps, how many of you read the New York Times article about how we almost got there in the 70s and the 80s and what was missing, right? And so I've studied everything I can study, about the hard science, right, the physics and the chemistry of climate change and global warming. And last year it occurred to me, why is it we can solve incredible problems? We can send people to the moon. We can solve this ozone hole. Humanity can come together about that. We can create just awe-inspiring creations. I mean, the creativity of humanity is just mind-blowing. I mean, every day I read about something. And so I found myself asking, so why is it that we haven't solved this global warming issue? What's going on with that? And I imagine that many of you have asked that same question, and there are multiple answers to that. Some of which might include dark money, etc. But the one ingredient that came up in the New York Times and about which I know I need to learn more is the psychology and the neuroscience behind climate change. There's a great deal about how our evolutionary brains are wired that I'm learning about that informs how we might have those discussions. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is that when we understand both our brain's strengths and our built-in thinking biases, which is what Buddhism is really insightful with. It's the perfect Buddhism is the perfect tool to supplement and support this neuroscience and the way we approach our climate communication. So I'd like to share some of the things that I've learned that might help us with our climate communications. So when we talk about, I have a little graph up here. This is basic Buddhism. We talk about right speech on the Eightfold Path, and what I'm learning from, for example, just when I sing with my jazz band, is that it's supported by right view. And when I think of right view, I think in terms of a physical visualization. But I think there's a corollary to that, which I call deep listening or right listening. And from that, I use some of my coaching skills to inform that. In terms of right view, one of the things that we talk about in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition is the interbeing. And of course, that means we understand that we're not separate from the planet. How many of us could live for more than a few minutes without the air that we breathe, which is an incredibly thin layer on our planet? It's thinner than the skin of an apple. And our fate is inextricably intertwined with other life forms, the plants that we consume for dinner, and all the animals and the minerals that form our nutrition. But what I'm finding is maybe most important of all in terms of solving this problem is that humans, other humans, loving and understanding and caring about other humans is possibly the most important in this communication. Because until we understand how we think as a species and how individuals think differently in many cases from us, that's what diversity is all about, much of it. When we put together those two things, and we love and care about other humans, then I believe that's our best chance for addressing the climate change. And many of us have spoken in the last day or two about our despair when we look at the situation with respect to climate change. And I know that there are my friend Michelle and others here, many of you work in hospice. So we need to build that love and community, whether that helps us to solve the problem, or even if we don't, humanity doesn't surmount this challenge, then we support each other in whatever happens. So the brain, the neuroscience is a necessary ingredient, and so of course is our love and compassion for other human beings. I want to talk a little bit about deep listening. We start with right view. So one really outstanding tool that I've come across is a scientist by the name of Per Espen Stoknes, who is Norwegian. And he's got a wonderful TED Talk. You can Google Per Espen Stoknes. It's I'm just going to provide a couple of sources here. He does strategic work, and he also is a psychologist. I'm sorry, you probably can't all see that. Okay. And he's got a wonderful 15-minute TED Talk. He also has a book called What We Think When We Try Not to Think About Global Warming. And he's identified many of the human evolutionary biases that get in our way. So I wanted to share these because in his TED Talk he actually shows different ways of talking about climate change, some of which are utterly ineffective and which will sound very familiar. The very scientific, 2.5 degrees centigrade and 410 parts per million, and the 80% scenario, and so forth. And then there's the doomsday scenario, and he has you kind of check your body and see how effective that was. And then at the end of his talk, he shows another way to talk about climate change. So let's see. I'm going to have to go a little bit from memory, but and give me a 5-minute warning. So he talks about these 5 Ds that really form defenses in our mind against addressing climate change. One of them is distance. You know, the idea that these polar bears far away or that are far away are going to be affected and that we're not affected. Or distance in terms of time, that, in the year 2100 there'll be an issue. I think many people are starting to understand that the issue is right here and now. And I'll talk about the antidotes to these in just a minute. So another one is doom, right? When you hear, we're going to be killed by cyanide gas, there'll be fires, there'll be famine, people are just going la 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 la, I have enough to deal with. I can't deal with that. And our defenses go up. And of course, we're frightened. So that's not typically an effective way to help people to communicate by hitting them with disaster scenarios. Now, there's a lot of reality to that, but there are ways to communicate communicate the actions that we can take. Another one is dissonance. Has anyone here ever heard of cognitive dissonance? Okay, so a great example that he gives in his talk is about how he has flown from Copenhagen, I guess it was Copenhagen, he'd flown from Copenhagen across the ocean to give this 15-minute TED Talk. I think it was in New York, but here. And so he says, I have a little cognitive dissonance about that. And how many people did not use fossil fuels to get to this conference? Did anybody walk here? We all have a little bit of cognitive dissonance about, cognitive dissonance is I say this and I do that, or I have two ideas that are incompatible. So what many people do is it's too painful to hold in their mind what I'm doing and what I'm saying and what I say I care about. And so it's more comfortable to kind of change our beliefs to match what we do. So that's another defense. And denial is just, I'm going to pretend that this whole thing is a hoax and that I feel some relief and I don't have to deal with it. And then this one in the middle it's in the middle for a reason because it's very central in its identity. So he gives the example that if you are someone who believes that big government is dangerous and you perceive the solution to climate change to be more government regulation, if that's your perception, then you will find that very difficult to accept because you're a person who believes, for example, in not more government that doesn't get any bigger. So these were just a few of the examples of the thinking biases that are built into us that can get in the way. And then he talks about how we can use what works about our human brains to overcome some of these. So one is social, and I'd also call this local, right? So in Boise, Idaho, if I write a letter to the editor, I might talk about the smoke that makes us have to cancel soccer games, for example. The fires, we have a lot of fires. It might be floods somewhere else. And making it a social and having social events. I guess I'll share one more thing here. Social. I believe it's also important to make this fun, and make green things fun. And when I put solar panels on my house a couple of years ago, I had a big party and invited all the neighbors. And several of them ended up putting solar panels on their homes. So that was, have fun, make it sexy. That's, supportive means a number of different things. But basically, one of the recommendations is that for each doom issue, for each issue that you bring up, you can provide 3 solutions. So, what can I do about the fires in Boise? Well, I can drive my car less, I can carpool, I can eat vegan or vegetarian. I can combine, if I do fly, I can combine trips. So you can provide those, or, for example, support carbon fee and dividend. So part of the antidote to the doom scenario is for each issue that you bring up, provide 3 actions or 3 solutions that you can take. The third one is simple, right? We're all overwhelmed, especially people who are working and raising a family, especially lower income people who are just trying to make ends meet. So make it simple. I teach a class at Boise Community Ed called Cut Your Carbon Footprint and Save Time and Money. And I don't give them these lists of 100 things to do. I say, let's find out what your biggest carbon footprint, where does that lie? Is it your transportation? Is it your food? Is it your purchases? Is it your home? Where is your biggest opportunity? And let's work on that one thing. Just one thing. Or it might be as simple as, instead of using, plastic cups wherever you go, as we have done, get one of these and drink out of these. And then signals. So it's really helpful to have some progress. So some way of measuring our progress. Maybe you might track how many miles you're driving each week. You might keep track of how many people in the neighborhood have solar, if that's a thing. You might look at how many electric lawnmowers there are in the neighborhood, or something that will allow you to measure your progress towards the goal that you've set. Is that 5 minutes? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the last one is story, telling stories. Telling a story of something that you did, like, so I'll tell a real quick story of my solar panels. I decided many years ago I wanted solar panels on my roof. In 2014, I went out and got a bid. It was more than I wanted to pay. 2 years later, there was kind of a buyer's program sponsored by a local group, and it was 40% cheaper. So I was the first person in this program to purchase it, and we advertised it everywhere. We wrote letters to the newspaper, and we had 100 people sign up. So those stories, those individual stories, people are not interested in charts and graphs, generally speaking. You want to hear an individual story. What did he do? What did she do? Tell your personal story. So I've only got a few minutes left. So I encourage you to look this up on the internet, and I'll be happy to send this out in the material from the conference or to you. And his book, again, is called What We Think About When We Think About Global Warming, when we try not to. So one other piece I want to add is deep listening, and this is from the coaching practice, that is life coaching. We talk about something that is really the same as deep listening. It's not just the words, and it's kind of what's between the lines and what people are feeling, and that your intuition about what must it be like to be you. And the song that came up for me was, "Walk a mile in my shoes." You know that song? Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you accuse, criticize and abuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. So really, thank you. Thank you. So really put yourself in that other person's shoes and wonder, what are their values? What are their needs and what are their wishes? And when I catch myself coaching someone and I find myself wanting to jump in and tell my story, oh yeah, that reminds me of the time when, and I stop and I ask them the next question. I'm curious. And 3 questions we ask in coaching that I'd like to share with you is, what do you wish for? What do you need? Right? It could be very different from what I wish for and need. Second question would be, what would it mean to you to have that? And the third question, the first question is, what do you wish for? The second question is, what would it mean to you? And the third question is, what gets in the way? And then we work through that, what gets in the way. And so since time is running, I'll leave you with one thought. The motto for coaches is, be curious, not judgmental. So I'd like to leave you with that.
I have notes, but I'm really going to speak more from my heart of my experience. And I really it's interesting, my process, because when Heather invited me to do this, my mind was really racing. And I was really trying to put it in words and form. And I decided to put it down and go outside. And every time I came back, I've got to get it written in perfect form. I found my mind really disturbed by that. And I didn't feel for me that it was an honest way to present. I wanted to present from my experience. So it's going to be pretty free form, but I'm using quotes. I'll give a little description about myself. My name is Joyce Singh. I live in Iowa, so you can get an image maybe of Iowa. My husband and I, we live in the country. 3 miles, if you were to go from the Mississippi inland, straight, you'd come to our home in the country. When we moved to our home in the town of LeClaire, what really called us to this place was, we lived in the city prior to that. We know nothing about farming, but it was the land. And if you can imagine, the land coming from the river 3 miles up still has some hills, right? You have the water pushing the land, and you have a little bit of the hill. We also had, which was very unique in this area, of mostly farmland. Mostly people are farming corn and soybean, or raising horses, grazing animals, is we had a native woodland that had hickory and oak, and it was very unique. These are native trees. It also had some wetlands. So you can imagine, the lower lands are wetlands, and they have this sometimes areas that fill up in the spring. So we had this diversity. We had open areas, we had woodland, and we also had, which is also unique, savanna. If you know, woodland is where you have the trees coming close together and they form a canopy. So it's a more shaded, you have understory trees and you have woodland plants. The savanna is a more open area where you have oaks and hickories still, but they reach out. They have this space. The savannas tend to be the introduction of the prairie to the woodland. It's like there's another ecology there. When we moved there, we didn't know anything, and we were really learning from the land because the land was beautiful. We've lived there since my daughter, I've lost track of time. For about 25 years we've lived there. So this is 24 acres. We added on a few more acres. We have 35 acres. We've planted I wish I had a number. 7 acres was a hay field, and we put in more native trees. And now there's 34 acres. There's also a hills that I got tired of mowing, right? And so I experimented, and I love prairie plants. Are amazing. If you're not familiar with the Midwest area, you might not know, but prairie plants are the native plants that were here after the glacial era age. They can get very tall, but their roots are twice as deep as the top of the plant. So if the plant grows 4 feet tall, that means the roots are 8 feet deep. The plant's 7 feet tall, and some of them can get 5 to 7 feet. The roots are at least twice as deep as that. And if you think about it, this is why the soil is so rich now. Because it was the prairie that loosened the soil, that as it died, it created the rich soil. It brought the nutrients up. It held the soil in place to prevent erosion. It held the water in the land longer. They are very resistant plants because they do fine in the harsh winters. In fact, they do well in a fire. They like fire, in fact. That's how some of the seeds that are so hard can open up. So what I did is I saw these hills, and I got tired of mowing hills. So I experimented, and I did not want to use the herbicide that we were very familiar with, Roundup. So, and I knew nothing, but I love these plants. I got the plants, they're native plants from the Soil and Water Conservation Group. This is something that's in most states. They provided the native seed, the native plant, and I got starters. I didn't want to use Roundup, so what I did is I worked slowly. And I would do a shallow till, because you want the earth to be firm, because that's how the earth is. It's not tilled usually. But I had to do a narrow till, and I had to take up the turf. So I took up the turf, and then I took, and this is plastic, but I'm hoping it's in the plastic form. I'm hoping I'm using it well and wisely, but I have to. And I put it down, and then I did cross hatch like this, and I hand planted. And I would let it grow for 1 summer, and then I would remove the plastic. And I did that for about 5 years, just adding on. Then we had a man from Illinois who was an expert in prairie who came out, and he helped us seed the rest. This is a long process. What I noticed, the changes in you make the environment, you help the environment, and life comes. There were butterflies and birds and bees coming, and it was just amazing to watch this. So that's one thing we did. I wanted to read a quote from you about the way that I practice, and I want to say that we all have different ways of communicating, and I think that that's beautiful, because some people have a strength in doing social work, or some people are scientists. I'm not. I just work in small scale. And it's right here. This is how I function. And it can get bigger, but I don't do grand scale. And I think that living in a state of monoculture, I think that the grand scale is a problem when we start working in a grand scale. And we lose our touch and our contact because we're using huge machinery. And I'm not discounting. Farmers have hard work, and they feed so many people. But if you look at the land, a lot of what is being grown is not for human consumption. It's for feeding animals and for ethanol. So I work in a small scale. I wanted to read a couple of quotes. This one maybe represents me and maybe not you, and that's fine. Your work is not to drag the world kicking and screaming into a new awareness. Your job is simply to do your work sacredly, secretly, and silently, and those with eyes to hear, to see, eyes to see and ears to hear will respond. I can't work in the grand scale. That's just not the way that I function. So this is a quote from Arcturian, the Arcturians, which I learned was actually in the fourth dimension, and I don't even know what that is. So I just found it powerful. I work in small ways. I wanted to read a quote, and I'm going to go into something that's very important to me in this practice, and that is Sangha. This is a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. I think of my land when I read it. I think of my body. I think of my family. I think of the community of people I practice meditation with. And I think of my community, and it goes on. Sangha has many meanings to me. A Sangha is a garden full of many varieties of trees and flowers. When we can look at ourselves and others as beautiful, unique flowers and trees, we can truly grow to understand and love one another. One flower may bloom early in the spring, and another flower may bloom in late summer. One tree may bear many fruits, and another tree may offer cool shade. No one plant is greater or lesser, or the same as any other plant in the garden. Each member of the Sangha also has unique gifts to offer the community. That's what a prairie is. That's what a woodland is. The diversity is so important. And the Sangha practicing together, there's such beautiful diversity in the Sangha of people who come together, talents and gifts. And a Sangha meets at my home. For 10 years we have. My aspiration as an OI member was, the question was, what can you offer the Sangha? And I said, Mother Earth is offering everything right now. I just provide a space here. And I hope that people can come. People come from the city and they find it refreshing to be quietly sitting with Mother Nature in this setting. There's not the noise, there's not the stress. Walking outside and really in contact. Not just talking about it, but walking barefoot. Touching the earth. Part of it is taking a cedar, that little berry cedar, and breaking it open and smelling it. Or the white pine, smelling it. So Sangha to me is Mother Earth. Sangha to me is this body, as you've had said, Mother Earth right here. This body is also a Sangha of its own, and I can't even completely understand that I'm made up of many organisms, living organisms here. What part of me is human is really, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I just can, okay, what is it?
90% of our body is non-human DNA.
There you go.
90%.
So this body is a Sangha of many living organisms. The earth is very diverse. The earth is a Sangha of many diverse organisms, each blooming and showing at different times. The other Sangha is my family. And my husband is a very big part of it. My children are a very big part of my Sangha. Even though my husband will tell you I'm not a part of the Sangha, He's part of the Sangha. This is inclusiveness. I'll tell you a couple of little stories. Sangha is also the larger and always expanding Sangha. Inclusiveness is important. I'll tell you a few stories of how I work with my land, with myself, with my Sangha, and the practice with neighbors. So there's a fence around our property. Our property is very unique in that it's in a field of monoculture. And the neighbors are amazing. I love conversation with the neighbors. In the springtime, if you're from the Midwest, you know what grows in the springtime that everyone loves. Morel mushrooms. Mm-hmm. The neighbor who has a field that he rents out for usually a soybean or corn, loves to go mushroom hunting. So he calls me, Joyce, I think the mushrooms are out now. Let's go. It's right around Mother's Day. So I say, okay, Bill, let's go. Now, I'm walking back there, and he's looking for mushrooms. And you take a stick. It's a beautiful process of looking. They say hunting for mushrooms, and it's not hunting, by the way. The monastics who don't know. It's looking. It's looking for mushrooms. Looking for mushrooms. And so I'm out there, and I'm pointing out, because it's the springtime, this is when you see bluebells, and you see all of these wildflowers coming up. Trillium. I'm running out of time. So we go out there and we explore. This is how we bring a dialogue. He has agreed to plant hay instead of corn and soybean. The benefit is 5 years. Is 5 years, and it's not sprayed, and it's not moved, and then there's less erosion. Okay, the other ways I'm going to try to work through this is the larger community. What we've done is we've become very. The land there has become pretty well known. There's been newspaper articles on what we're doing. And at the time that we brought out the articles or started sharing what we're doing, and really kind of the direction of just unfarming, kind of, but I have respect for farmers, is we also had to bring awareness to what's happening to the trees. The plants are talking, right? So there's usually what they spray on the fields is a pre-emergent herbicide before the corn starts coming up. This is to get rid of the weeds on neighbors' patches. It comes over. They do aerial spraying, okay? So being in the midst of it and having a voice. Mm-hmm. So what we share, and we actually have foresters involved in this for years, our trees have been looked at because there's oak tatter. Right at the time they spray is when the oak tree is just beginning to release its leaves. And it gets sprayed with an herbicide. And as it opens up its leaf, it all goes back to the vein, and it's called oak tatter. They have been watching this in many states, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. But so when when an article in the newspaper came up about the land and what we're doing, that had to be a part of it. But it also had to be an open conversation with those who are farmers, working a certain way. This is inclusiveness, and it's hard, but it's inclusiveness. That has gone further into... I had said to my husband years ago, I see less pollinators, and so he's very active. So he started a campaign. He said that he would walk the Colorado Trail to raise money to bring awareness to pollinators. That's something he loves to do. He loves to hike. I don't. He says if I go any slower, I'll be going backwards. And I love to walk, but at my pace. Okay. So he raised. So he brought awareness to this pollinator thing, and we started a pollinator conference, not just us, it's many people. It's Nahant Marsh, which is a great ecology, and I can tell you more about it, system that is in the wetland area. It was many different organizations that came together to do the Pollinator Conference. I can share with you later. The other thing is the Figge Museum, Art Museum, the WVIK, which is public radio, WQPT, public television, some of the elementary schools. I'm going to miss some here. Oh, actually, John Deere. And I think Prairie John Deere pulled it up, but you know what? Still, we use lawnmowers and we use tractors, and I'm hoping that John Deere can use ways of then doing things more, soundly with energy use in the future. But anyway, we all came together and we decided to do bringing attention to the prairie. And so we did a campaign, and Water Soil Conservation Group gave out plants for people contributing to the radio station, which is public radio. And then there was the Figge Museum, Art Museum, brought in local artists who were doing artwork on the prairie and the native woodland, the prairie mostly. So they brought in their art, and it was all of these groups coming together in a very community way. And there's so much I want to say, but I guess the points that I'll end with is working inclusiveness is listening to the conversation. At the Pollinator Conference, Monsanto was there. And it was okay. It was very hard for me to go in and listen. But we have to allow the speaking in order to understand. That doesn't mean that we agree. But we have to understand and open the dialogue rather than quickly making a judgment. But we also have to allow the trees to speak, the plants to speak, the birds to speak. And we have to work hard to help be that voice. I'm hardly touching the surface. The prairie plants are that deep. Roots. I'm a pioneer plant. Pioneer plants bring the nutrients to the soil at the top. That's like lichen, okay? That's all good.
So, let me set the clock. Fair is fair. I have been an activist for a long time. Can you hear me okay? All right. After many years, I got burned out. Didn't even realize how burned out I was. Had a chance to... I was feeling like I needed to shift gears and had a chance to go sailing with my husband. And it was a life dream that we shared. And so my husband and I moved aboard a sailboat for 6 years and sailed the Atlantic and the Caribbean. And it was a time of navigating the ocean wilderness and of deep practice and of getting into all kinds of trouble. And I wrote a book about it because there was so much trouble and so much personal learning. And it's called Ocean of Insight, A Sailor's Voyage from Despair to Hope. And it came out on Election Day. Wow. Yeah, after writing it like 7 years, all of a sudden, poof. And nobody noticed when it came out. But I wanted to share with you the very end. So, there's a lot of good stuff in here, pirates and maydays and all kinds of stuff. But I want to start at the end, which was about coming back to land again. And I was really quite nervous that I was going to turn back into that tired, angry, frustrated woman that had set sail. And so I made myself a list of things I was no longer willing to do because I hadn't done them in 6 years. And that list included, I was no longer willing to make enemies, be angry, we talked about that one already, be ambitious, blame others, rush, exaggerate or spin my message, work long hours, or argue my case. And that was really interesting, because what happened was when I returned and I would be in a conversation with somebody who would just say something wrong or something I disagreed with, I would go, and I had this visceral awareness that I was leaning forward. I had this sharp inhale and my finger pointed right out. I was like, and it's like, who is that woman? I didn't like her, you know? So I caught myself and I just shut my mouth, I put my finger down, and I decided that I would listen for twice as long as I thought I was going to talk. And invariably, what happened was, I realized that I had nothing to say. That either what I was going to say wasn't going to be heard, or that I had misunderstood and what I was going to say wasn't really even necessary. So that was a real awakening, just that particular awareness. But, you know, it's not okay with me just to have a list of what you're not willing to do, so I needed a list of what I was willing to do. And that list included to make friends and to cultivate happiness and share my joy with others. This is going to sound somewhat familiar. To work in small and simple ways. To look deeply into the roots of conflict. Past the stories I'm telling myself to the causes and conditions. Proceed peacefully and being mindful as I go, not only of what's happening in here, but what's happening out there and vice versa. So kind of this dual awareness. Speaking really plainly and accurately to the best of my ability, and listening as I share. So I wasn't actually going to share this, but I told my husband that I was giving this talk, and he said, "Oh, start with the end of the book." So there you go. That was from my husband. And I think it's a good place to start, though, because so many of the things we're talking about at the retreat are about cultivating happiness, sharing our joy, deep listening. And, I come to the question, if what we want to do is transform and heal, what is the language, what is the message that we need to be offering that is transformative and healing? And to me, Ty, one of the deepest teachings he shared that I heard was that when we really love, we don't give the other person what we want to give them. We give them what they need. And so I think that is a part of this communication. It's not just about us spouting out what we have to say in order to feel better. It's really about understanding where the other person is at. So, in addition to that kind of awareness, I find in the work that I now am doing back on land that to have a message that's transformative and healing, it really helps to couple the right speech with right action. That, as you were saying, that you have the message that might be hard to take, but you're supporting it with something that people can do. And recently I heard Proverb 29 is, without a vision the people perish. And so there's this responsibility, I think, in right climate change speech to be giving a vision with, the message. So another way to think about this also that I find helpful, I attended a conference recently that was on military, national security, and climate change. Fascinating. And the military has a different kind of way of speaking about this than we do in the Plum Village tradition. But it's good. It's really good because people can hear it. And that message is that we need to consider the risks. And we need to find solutions. And we need to, they don't quite say this explicitly, but in there is we need to navigate our values and our emotions. So that's kind of simple, you know. If I'm going to someone that I don't really know very well, and we're having a conversation about something that's difficult, it's kind of a safe space to talk about the risks and finding solutions. I mean, that's kind of what we're all familiar with doing in our daily life anyway. The last piece of this that I'd like to say before I jump into something is that in the nonprofit work that I did for so long, when I would message something, you know, it was kind of a pet peeve of mine that you don't just raise awareness, you ask for behavior change. So, you know, it's great to raise awareness, but that doesn't do anything. So if we're really looking for transformation and healing, again, it's that coupling it with action, raising awareness and the invitation. What's the invitation? So that kind of puts the burden on me to have the suggestions, as you were saying, to have the message that engages people and kind of guides them in the engagement. One of the things, and I'll just say this right now, because I'm going to come back to this. This is a cool book. This is called The Low Carbon Diet, How to Lose 5,000 Pounds in 30 Days.
The biggest loser.
Yeah, and what's so great about it is it starts with an online carbon calculator. So you go on, and you add in, you know, you contact your utility company, you add in your therms, you add in your watts, and, you know, answer a few questions, and a number spits out, and now you know your household footprint in carbon emissions, and you can compare it to other American households, and you can compare it to other households around the world, and you can see how you stack up. And then you, in a small group of 5 to 10 of your closest friends, you meet for 4 meetings, and you go through this book, and you go, if I hang my clothes on the line, if I drive differently, if I change my light bulbs, and you do the math. And it's crystal clear. And it's not drama. And what I find is that, you know, people get it, and they want to help, they just don't know what to do. And so answering that question about what to do is so helpful. So I'm going to come back to this, but let me jump to one more thing about the speech part. And this is, I hope you all can see this. So these are sticky. I've got a number of pages here. This is some resources. I'm going to be talking about 13 steps for climate communication. You can find it at this web address. I made a little bit.ly link, so you can go straight there. George likes to use tiny URL. I use bit.ly. And then the workbook, if you want to find this on Amazon, that's the address there. Whoops, I don't want to show you the homework yet. So we're going to put that over here. I feel like I'm wallpapering. Okay, well, this is enough to get started. These first 4 steps in climate communications are absolutely everything. So if you only remember 4 things today, remember these. You start with people. You connect with your values, you acknowledge the ambivalence, and you scale it from personal to planet. And I can give you an example of when I wasn't very good at this. So I am a Coast Guard auxiliarist, my husband and I, and we were working an event at the Boeing plant and standing on asphalt, and it was Boeing Family Day. And I was standing, I'm new to the South. I live in South Carolina now. And I'm still trying to figure the South out. And there's a gentleman standing next to me, and he says, "Boy, it is so hot." And I said, "Yes, it is." He goes, "It is so much hotter than I remember it being when I was a kid." And I said, "Yeah, it really is." He goes, and those storms. I mean, we keep getting flooded. What is up with that? And I said, yeah, that climate change is really... Oh, no, he says, I am not talking about climate change. None of that nonsense. All I'm saying is it's hotter than when I was a kid. So I immediately do a head thing and, start having judgment mind and all that. But I've got my list, and I'm not going to say things that aren't helpful and argue my case, so I button my mouth, and I don't know what to say. But it didn't at least cause harm. What I could have said is, run. Let me take a step back. Because, I want to first of all just acknowledge that you have been giving a ton of time to the auxiliary, way more than I have. And you have done, this, and you've done that, and you've done this. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate it. And it's amazing because, I understand you're not even a boater. And I find it incredible that you're doing all this with the Coast Guard. And let me tell you, one of the things that I think we have in common, we are very patriotic. Because patriotism is serving something larger than yourself. And I see you doing that every day when you come to the base. And I know you're taking care of those men and women so that they can take care of safety at sea. And I just really appreciate that. And I want you to know I, too, care about things larger than myself. And as far as this thing, I mentioned climate change, I know that people are all over the board about what this climate change thing is about, where it's coming from, and who's to blame. But I'll tell you, you're right. It is hotter. We don't have to agree on a lot of things, but it is hotter than when we were children. And there is something that people can do about that. Now, whether we're the whole source of the problem or not, we don't have to agree on that, but there's things we can do because it's hotter here and we're seeing flooding, and that's actually happening all up and down the coast. And so I have some things that I've been doing that if you're interested in ever talking about it, I'd be glad to share it with you. And I'm thinking about, some things in this book. So that would have been far more skillful. And it would have been absolutely right speech, true, because they were truthful words, every bit of it. But what would have happened was I would have stepped back and gotten back in relationship. And that is actually the whole point of these first 4 steps. The others are, and when I say sequence matters, it means that don't go farther until you've done these 4. You don't have permission. Why would we continue to have a conversation if the person we're talking to isn't hearing us, doesn't appreciate us, thinks that, all these wrong perceptions about us? But if we can create the space by acknowledging ambivalence and not having to be right about our position, and really say, here's how we're the same, and, this is something that we see, we experience, then we can go on to other points. So you're on a roll. You can talk about some facts, and I'll get on to those other points in a minute. So that's one example. Now, I am also doing work in Charleston, trying to communicate with churches, with congregations, with neighborhood groups, with nonprofit volunteer groups about this book. We're trying to seed this in the community so that we are starting 7 pilot projects and launching, to really get people to wrestle with this. And if you are interested in this, I included my website here. You can email me because this needs an update, and I have a 1-page update that I can forward to you so that it's totally accurate. And what I could say to Charleston, which is a great big group of people that I don't necessarily know one-on-one, but I'm talking to a group, I can say, we're all here because we love this city. I mean, the architecture is unbelievable. The history is vibrant. The best part, though, in my mind, is that interface of land and water, because it is the source of our economy, it is the source of our recreation, it is the source of our food, it is the source of our history. So, starting with the people, connecting with a common value. It can be a love of place. And then when we talk about climate change, people, again, are all over the board. We don't have to agree. But we're starting to see problems here in Charleston. We've got real flooding. We had Joaquin, Matthew, Irma. 3 years in a row, people were making FEMA claims and rebuilding their homes. And we know it's going to get worse. So I'm just demonstrating this to say that, it works on an individual, interpersonal basis, and it also works in groups if you want to be representing something and then getting to a solution. So I'm sharing this because I have an ulterior motive, and that is 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, okay. 11, 12, 13. So we're all practitioners. We're all in sanghas. And we all love this tradition. It's very rich. We have deep teachings on our inner being with the planet. We're here because we care. And when we go back to our sanghas, we run into people that don't necessarily think like we do, that are afraid to turn our sanghas into political instruments, that are very much committed to having their sanghas be places of refuge and peace. And the idea of getting involved in some of this earth holding and protecting can be upsetting. But we, as a global community, no matter where we live, we can see right in our neighborhood what is happening. So in Charleston, it's flooding. In the Midwest, it's messed up agricultural cycles. It's polar vortexes. Out west, it's fires. We can be very specific wherever we live about the things that are happening. And then we can step back to the global scale. As a community, if we took in all of the symptoms of climate change that our global community of practitioners are witnessing right now, we would pretty much represent the entirety of the symptoms that are happening planet-wide. And we know it's getting worse. So there could be a few simple facts here, but not grounding the people that we love in our communities with science, but just what's happening here. If I were in Charleston, I might say, last year we had 53 days of sunny day flooding. No storms, but just where the planets aligned in such a way that the high tide came right up through the storm drains, and people couldn't get to work and were walking to school and couldn't get to school. And we know that by 2045, half of the days every year will be experiencing sunny day flooding. So, a simple fact from wherever you live. Oops. And then inspire and empower. As a sangha, as people of practice, we have a teacher that has shown us how to engage. His life is his message. And we can do this because we are a global community, and here there are solutions. You can take this book to your sangha, and 5 to 8 people go through, figure out your carbon footprint. This is simple living. This is measurable, quantifiable, fun to do. It's got even little cartoons in it. And you can do it together and actually have the practice not only inspire and educate yourselves, but inspire and educate others as well. So there's a solution that you as a community can do. Now, I didn't use any technical language about mitigation and adaptation and all of that kind of stuff. It's just simple description, and we could have here easily a powerful fact from Ty that he says that every person has the capacity to be an earth holder, and he has lots and lots of quotes to this effect. And then we want to use common language like preparing and preventing harm. This is so nestled in our practice, this notion of preventing harm. speaking from the mountaintops, being inspiring, and again, talking about the ways that our teacher has led us. And then message discipline at the end just means that you go back and touch upon the main points. So if you wanted to go back to your community or practice center and introduce this book, which happens to be available at this website with an update at this place, and you want to use these 13 steps to introduce it, go for it. So, yeah, well, we'll get to the homework later. So, I was going to say, let's go ahead and just open it up. There's going to be a lot of wisdom in this room. There's probably also some real questions that folks have. You comfortable with that? Just opening it up? And, okay, so let's have people bow in. And
what's the top one? Right? What?
Okay, the bit.ly is right climate speech. Yeah.
You talk about bringing this to a sound guide. I'm about to get pretty deeply involved with a place called the Christine Center in Willard, Wisconsin, which is a Franciscan retreat center. And it seems to me that this could be an ongoing type of thing that could be offered, sound alike as retreats within that environment. In order to do that, though, you have to be pretty good at all of this, which you would be if you did it a few times. But to get started, it would be really helpful to actually experience someone doing this. Do you have anything like that people can view in video format?
I would encourage you to look at the empowermentinstitute.org, which is the founder of this book, and the author is David Gershon. He has so much material on this, and actually at the end of the book, there are facilitator guides. So meeting 1, here's the homework, here's how you prepare, here's what you're going to ask, and it just walks the agenda for meeting 1. Meeting 2, here's how you, before the meeting, this, so it's all here. It's really explicit. Yeah.
He has another workbook that is slightly larger than that, but the same format, that has even more examples and ideas of things that people can do to reduce their carbon footprint. So I ordered both of them and plan to launch those types of groups in Florida this fall.
Could you get me the information on the other one?
Sure.
I was going to mention the Union of Concerned Scientists also has a book with, it's not real nerdy, but it has more of the kind of background behind our carbon footprint and what the sources are in the United States.
And the book Drawdown by Paul Hawken
that's
is being widely used also.
That's a good one also. Yeah, that's very, very interesting.
Union of Concerned.
It's called, UCS, Union of Concerned Scientists has a book called Cooler, Smarter.
I'd be interested in hearing also from you any experiences that you had in conversations and any insights you might have had about how they went, how they might have been improved, what actually worked.
One follow-up question. The cost and financial benefits associated with moving in this direction, is there anything out there on that?
I have one also. If you use the, I don't know which carbon calculator you use. In my classes, we use the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, the LBNL calculator. And it'll actually show you for each action you could take, what's the reduction in carbon in pounds and what's the probable investment. So you can say, what is, the question we ask in my class is, okay, now you've got your baseline carbon footprint right now. what is the most effective action in terms of pounds reduced that you can afford, right? Like maybe some people can't afford to go out and buy a new car, but they could put in some insulation. So that Lawrence Berkeley National Labs calculator will get that. I'll see if I can find the website address for you. LVNL.
And what we'll do is if there are other suggestions that we put together, I know we're going to do a follow-up email after the retreat. We'll go ahead and share any of the additional resources, so you'll have them as well. I think I would like to just say a few things about connecting on values too, because sometimes this is the most mysterious, especially when your brain is busy making judgments about the other person, to find that place where you can actually connect. And I mentioned that you can connect, that you both have a common care about a community treasure, a particular landscape that is precious. I mentioned patriotism and something larger than yourself, not all about what I want. There's also something that resonates with the notion of we are the ones that can do this, not necessarily always depending on government. There's something very empowering about we the people, and that we can reawaken that sense. I mentioned prepare and prevent harm. Those are really big ones, and those are really easy, I think, for us to remember. That we all want to prepare for what's coming, no matter what it is in life, and we want to prevent harm where we can. And so that's not a big leap for most people to hear. Oftentimes, too, we can do just a real quick cost-benefit kind of analysis where the cost, it's well documented that the cost of action is much less than the cost of inaction. And just saying that, people are like, oh, yeah, well, I suppose you're right. The cost of action is much less than the cost of inaction. And then, of course, we all care about our children and our grandchildren, and wanting them to have the same incredible opportunities that we had growing up. So these are really poignant kinds of touchstones that we can come to. Yeah.
Yeah, what you talked about values, that's just absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That's really the critical place to come together. I live in Boise, Idaho, which is a blue city in a very red state. So, I'm frequently speaking with people whose political values are different from mine. And two resources I found there is one is Jonathan Haidt is a professor who talks about the different values that people of different parties have. So we're not without values at either end, it's just we have different values. And one other thing you mentioned that was really important, I lost it. I lost it, sorry, it'll come back. Oh, I can't remember, it's gone.
The book you're talking about is called The Righteous Mind. Jonathan Haidt.
Yes.
It's just a real page turner. It's very easy to read. Yeah. And it really gives you an idea about what other people are thinking, why that people who are conservative have different values that people who are liberal just don't have. But they're not right or wrong. They just have.
They're just different values.
Right.
The New York Times also, if you're in a blue area and you're speaking with someone who has more of the conservative values, the New York Times published a really interesting list of different types of conservatives and their values, like what values they're speaking from. So if you're talking to someone who's very much a free market advocate, you can recognize that in your speech and acknowledge and work with that value. So that was interesting. The other thing you mentioned, Heather, was about protect and preserve. Again, the neuroscience shows that we're twice as interested in protecting and preserving what we have as in acquiring something new. So that sense of insurance, right, thinking of it from a perspective of insurance and preservation is really powerful for people of all political persuasions.
I know this is probably out of the scope of what you wanted to present tonight, and this is all wonderful, and I think it will give us many good ideas, but do you have any sense of what's happening internationally at all with any of these kinds of things? I mean, I know that, for example, that the earth holders are sort of international, but the one argument that actually comes up from a lot of conservative people is, that's great, you can clean all this stuff up. America is 2% of the world. Much more from the standpoint of how much energy we have, but that's from the land guy. So how is that going to make a difference? And I don't know what's going on in a lot of other areas. I know Europe seems to be very much behind that. Everybody else comes to sign the Paris Accord, let's put it that way. But I'm curious about what the international kind of flavor is about that. Are there people trying to reach people, say, in China, which has been a significant problem, or other emerging economies in, say, Latin America? So I don't know if anybody, that's you.
I'll actually, first of all, what the facts are and what's useful to say are two different things sometimes, right? So someone can pull you off into an argument, well, the U.S. is only X%. Is that really a useful place to start? I mean, one factoid I've seen is that the U.S. with 5% of the world's population has 25% of the world's carbon footprint.
Yeah, right.
So, we're definitely not insubstantial.
Right.
There's also a wonderful chart that I share in my classes that shows the total carbon footprint for each country and then the carbon footprint per person. And so in that, you'll see that other countries like China and India, are significant. But the question is, what do we do here and now? Because climate change is here and now. And what's the most effective way to engage that person, right? So maybe first hearing that person's values. They might have something called solution aversion, which is, yeah, I agree we should do something, but I don't like the way that I think we're going to have to do it. I might have to give up my F-350 truck or whatever it is.
I think, too, that because oftentimes there's the what about. Yeah, I mean, we see this a lot in the news lately where, you did X, Y, and Z. Yeah, well, what about the other guy? They did even worse. So that's not actually a real conversation. So if you find yourself in that's not, it's like you're not talking. So you can let that go, and go find someone else to talk to. But it doesn't have to be complicated, and this is one of the things about the science of this and the, what country is doing what. One of the things I really appreciate is a study from Yale that said all you have to know is 5 things. It's real, it's bad, it's us, scientists agree, and there's hope. That's all you have to know. And you can have a very legitimate conversation about it. It's real, it's bad, it's us, scientists agree, and there's hope. So I have in my conversations kind of a couple of rules. I don't allow myself to get intimidated by somebody having more facts or giving me a what about. It's like, I'm not going there. The other thing I don't do is I don't get into conversation with anybody trying to prove that it's a problem. Because people know. And if they start saying, well, yeah, not in my lifetime, blah, 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 it's like they're not ready for a conversation yet. Or it's like we're just not going to get anywhere. And there will be 10 to 15% of the population that's just in total denial. And that's not where you spend your time. We're talking about having real conversations with real people about what's really going on. And you don't have to spend your time trying to convince anyone. And I think that's where we get stuck, is we try to make the case. All we need to do is just have that moment of real connection, talking about what you really share, and true appreciation for the other person, and then what are you seeing? What can you touch? What are you both understanding as the reality? And then there's nothing to prove. Just, it's real, it's bad, it's us, scientists agree, and there's hope. Did you want to follow me?
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, you didn't.
I just wanted to share a little bit. So there's a river action group in the Quad City area and up the river. There are farmers who are really trying hard to make changes, and even though, and I'm talking, there's, for example, an award was given by the River Action Group that is a very active group in looking at what's going into the river and keeping it clean. The award was given to farmers who are CAFOS farmers. I actually attended a court hearing years earlier, where they were wanting to expand their CAFOS. And I was one person there among many who was showing opposition. And yet, and it's really disturbing. I don't support that. They don't eat meat. Yet, I have to look at something good. And I'm learning a lot by these different organizations that are able to really look at what is happening and bring attention to that. This family noticed the runoff, the soil erosion into the river. They were awarded because they put in prairie plants. Again, you know, the prairie plants bring that stability, that depth. They do this natural filtering that hold the soil in place. They're not an annual crop that needs to be tilled up and replanted. It is very self-sustaining. This is a plant that has been removed from the landscape, but there are farmers now understanding that to prevent our biggest export in Iowa, do you know what it is? Soil. It's soil running down the Mississippi. Most people think corn, soybean. It's soil. There are farmers now beginning to realize that and put in prairie plants that were here, are native, and they're amazing plants. There's also farmers that are now doing no-till, that are doing more thoughtful composting. So we could look at the big picture and say, oh, you know, but they're doing that. I don't support CAFOS, but you know what? I can have a dialogue and say, thank you for putting in that prairie. I think that is just beautiful work. That's all I have to do. If that's all I can do. Does that make sense?
What are you saying, Joyce? It's hard to hear the word.
Oh, it is
You don't support what?
CAFOS. So, gosh,
Confined
animal feeding operations.
What?
Right, confined animal feeding operations. Where it's big warehousing
I'm
of.
the only one.
I'm sorry. So the big warehouse, factory, farm is a very painful.
Right.
There's much suffering there.
Those of us that like them know what they are. Those of you that don't have them.
Well, I've never heard them called CAFO.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Confined animal
CAFO.
operation.
This is acronym CAFO.
CAFO.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So does anyone have something that they have found helpful that they've used? I mean, this is a really tricky thing, you know, and this topic of climate change speech, you know, you've seen us wrestle with it and come up with some different strategies. I mean, we have just a few minutes left. I'm wondering if there's anything that you found helpful.
Well, Heather, I can't talk about it on climate change, but I can talk about it on relationship to national health. That one of the strategies that someone told me to do, that I did once or twice and I said, wow, is to actually have the other person explain. So you say something like, well, you're against, national health, you're against a one-payer system. what exactly, how does that work? How would that look? And have them actually sort of explain that. And if they have an idea, whatever that concept is, about global warming or why the temperatures are higher, you might just have them sort of explain and go through that. I've heard that's a strategy that works. That's all I can do is give you my anecdote of two people talking about something entirely, well, not entirely different, but somewhat different, national health system stuff. And so the idea that you can actually get the other person to try to explain what your position is to see that they can kind of get an idea, sometimes that helps them see it from your point of view too, as opposed to you telling them what your position is.
And by being curious, you learn about their values and how they're thinking about it. I've seen some examples of how that can work. So I'll give a real quick example. Where I was working at Hewlett Packard, during that time there was a referendum that was coming up to not allow gay people to buy homes. And I remember it was did I get that right? It was along those lines. It was basically preventing certain people to have certain rights. Anyway, and I had a conversation with the man about it and just listened and got curious, and I learned that he was afraid of being raped. And, but it was just, I guess, I don't know if this is on topic or off topic, but it was just that by listening to him, I understood where his fear was coming from, what his opposition was.
And I think that that's an important part of right climate speech or right any speech is that it's not always that you're going to convince the other person. It's if you can get to some insight, and that we can go to the homework that I thought would be fun. Until I'm a great time. Okay, so something that you may want to challenge yourself with is in the next 2 weeks have 3 conversations with 3 different people and focus on steps 1 through 4. Connecting, a personal connection, connecting on values, and get your own language for acknowledging the ambivalence, giving people permission, accept wherever. What happens is they feel accepted for wherever they are, and they know there's room for them in the conversation, and then scale it from what's happening personally to what's happening, around the planet. It would be, I think, a really interesting thing than to really just focus on listening, and maybe not during, but afterwards, jot down some notes and just think about what you might want to do differently next time, what worked. We're basically teaching ourselves how to do this. We're basically finding our voice and finding our language. And so, 3 people, 3 conversations, these steps, focusing on listening.
And between step 1 and step 2 is that deep listening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm seeing it's tired. We're talking tired time. Paul will wake us up. What was that, Paul? Did you want to say something?
No.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you very much for wrestling with this. And thank you for your beautiful sharing to start this out. We were commenting that the facial expressions and the energy and the engagement, there is so much to say about our relationship with the planet and our hopes and aspirations for the future and what we're willing to do. So, I just encourage us all to stay with it. Did you want to say one more thing?
I did. This has just been incredibly rich, and I am usually just an avid note taker. I hardly took a note. I just listened. Mm-hmm. Is this all going to be available in some kind of format? Because it's really just tremendous stuff to absorb. Mm-hmm. It was so rich to me, all 3 of you.
Well, thank you for saying that. We are recording it, and we will be putting together an online retreat that shares this, and so it'll be available.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's have one more sound with the bell, and Just feel gratitude for the ability to come together and to learn from one another and to have clarity about our guiding star and our deepest aspirations. And to know that we're wrestling with this not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of all people, animals, plants, and minerals. And we wrestle with it together. So let's go ahead and enjoy our noble silence. And we will see you after your rest.